Hi everyone, and welcome to this presentation on Introduction to Policy Analysis. This is actually part 2 of the 5-video series on policy analysis, in particular the Gilbert and Terrell framework that is found in your textbook, Dimensions of Social Welfare Policy. So this video is going to focus on the basis of social allocations. When we're talking about the basis of social allocations, what we're really asking is who is going to benefit? In other words, who are the clients when it comes to social welfare policies? For example, are the clients going to be all children? Or are they going to be special needs children? Or specifically children who are food insecure or hungry or impoverished? Or is this policy going to benefit the elderly in general, or focus on older adults who have been abused, or perhaps older adults who are impoverished? Another choice, perhaps the beneficiaries are going to be those who are seriously mentally ill, or veterans, or homeless veterans. So you get the gist at this point. But essentially, this question of who is going to benefit really requires some sort of eligibility rules and to determine who is receiving the benefits, who the beneficiaries are. And generally speaking, we think of these eligibility requirements in two ways. One is residual and the other is universal. I touched on this in a little bit more detail on the first video in this series. But essentially, a universal policy is for everyone. Everyone benefits like all children. Versus a residual policy would focus on a specific group of children, in this case, those who are impoverished or food insecure. Another example of a universal policy would be one that benefits all older persons, whereas a residual one would focus on only older persons who are impoverished. Now, what about mental health policy? Well, if it's focusing on perhaps the severely mentally ill who are impoverished, then that would be residual. However, if we had a policy that provided mental health services for everyone, then that would be universal. So based on this, what do you think a policy that focuses on special needs children would be? Would that be residual or universal? What about one that focuses on older adults who are abused? Veterans, homeless veterans, or homeless individuals in general? Just take some time to think about it and come to class with your answers and we'll go over them. Okay, but regardless of whether it's a residual or universal policy in terms of who is benefiting, there are certain rules and criteria that have to be established in order to determine who is receiving the benefits. What's important to understand about these rules and criteria, and that I touched on a little bit in the first video, is that they are based on certain values and belief systems, certain assumptions that we make about people, and then also just general values that help determine who we want to help. So when it comes to universalism versus selectivity, there are certain key values to be mindful of. We'll go over universalism first. So this is based on the value of social effectiveness. The idea being that because they're for everyone, they will ultimately benefit society as a whole. In other words, programs designed for everyone are based on and lead to equality. Universalism values the need to preserve the dignity of people and the cohesion of society. It favors entitlements because restricting eligibility to particular groups accentuates differences in society that often take on moral tones and judgments against people. Also, restricting eligibility can make those receiving benefits feel shame and stigma, even when their rights to those benefits are clearly specified in the policy. Now let's look at selectivity. So this is based on the value of cost effectiveness, the idea of having programs be carefully targeted to certain beneficiaries who demonstrate need, because this is fiscally responsible. It limits resources in terms of where they are going so that they are going to those most in need. It's against entitlements because of the belief that it would be too expensive and that those not needing help would receive it nonetheless. So some have argued in the past, though unsuccessfully, that Social Security, for example, should not be universal. It should only be for those who can demonstrate that they need it. It remains universal, though, to this day, and hopefully in the future. That is the belief of myself and does not reflect the university for which I live. Yes, I do live for it, but for which I work. That's what I meant to say. Okay, so universalism and selective types of benefits are on a continuum. So they are the extreme of either side of this continuum. However, there are different shades in between, and in fact, there are 4 that your book goes over and that I will review now. The first involves attributed need. There are 2 aspects to attributed need. Actually, there's 2 aspects to all 4 of them. In this case, it involves group-oriented allocations, and it's based on a normative criteria of need. What does this mean? Well, group-oriented allocations means the following. Benefits are conditional on membership in a group of people that have common needs that are not being met by existing private, such as family or religious, or market arrangements. So in order to receive these benefits, the person has to belong to a specific group of people that are identified as having similar or common needs. Okay, but what are these normative criteria of need? Well, they are established standards or requirements that are agreed upon by society or government. So the government, and therefore us, because we sanction what our government does, decides on a minimum requirement for certain aspects of daily life. Let's go over an example to demonstrate. The Older Americans Act, which was originally enacted in 1965. This information I'm getting from this source here, but here's what it says. So the intent of the Older Americans Act is to promote the dignity of older adults by providing services and supports that enable them to remain independent and engaged citizens within their communities. While the program is open to older individuals, generally defined as 60 and older, it focuses on offering assistance to persons with the greatest social or economic need, such as low-income or minority persons, older individuals with limited English proficiency, and older persons residing in rural areas. Most services do not require means testing or co-payments. We'll talk about what means testing is towards the end. But donations may be requested, and some newer programs may have cost sharing or sliding scales. So a lot of these programs under the Older Americans Act involve interventions such as Meals on Wheels and the like to help older Americans have a certain standard of living that we as a society have decided is just. And we can see here that here it even mentions dignity. So one value in this case is valuing the dignity and self-worth of individuals. Okay. The second type of eligibility criteria involves compensation. So the 2 aspects of compensation compensation involve similar to attributed need, group-oriented allocations, but now we have benefits based on a normative criteria of equity. Okay, so the group-oriented allocations, it's still conditional on membership in a group, but now this is being defined as those who have either one, made a special social or economic contribution to society, or two, have suffered due to structural oppression. In terms of the normative criteria of equity, this involves established standards or requirements, again agreed upon by society or the government. But in this case, instead of a standard regarding need, it's a standard regarding equity or fairness, in other words. Examples of this involve one, points for veterans on things like civil service exams or financial aid. So this is sort of repaying or compensating veterans for their service by giving them additional opportunities. The GI Bill would be another example of compensation. Affirmative action is another type of compensation, in this case for oppression, historical oppression against minorities and women. So in both these cases, there's a compensation taking place. It's just that in one case, it's for contributions that have been made to society, whereas for the other is to make up for past wrongs, if you will. But in both cases, it's about fairness and equity. The third type of eligibility involves diagnostic differentiation. Again, with the two aspects, except now it is based on individual allocations and also based on technical diagnostic criteria of need. So in terms of the individual part, a professional assesses an individual regarding any special needs that this person may have. So there's no requirement to be part of a particular group of people. It's just on an individual basis. In terms of the diagnostic criteria of need, the need has to be established by a professional who makes a diagnosis using their professional judgment about any specific need or resource for this individual person. An example of this would be the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which used to be called the Education for Handicapped Children Act. So with this example, a professional, usually a doctor, has to make a diagnosis of a disability in order for the child to receive the benefits that come from this act. And this act provides certain interventions and what have you to ensure that all children receive the education that we believe they are entitled to. And the last type of eligibility criteria involves means-tested need. The two aspects here involve individual allocations, and it's based on an economic criteria of need. So unlike the normative standard of need when it comes to attributed need, this is based on specific economic criteria. Okay, in terms of the individual allocations, here the idea is that it has to be an individual who is unable to purchase goods and services on their own. So in other words, they do not have the means to do so on their own. They don't have the means to purchase the goods and services on their own. So that's where we get the means part of means tested. Where do we get the tested part, you may ask? Well, right here. So the government makes a determination of need based on having some income threshold. So the test part is in terms of the government testing to see if the individual is making less in terms of income than whatever cutoff is established. In terms of policies, There are many. There's temporary assistance for needy families, public assistance. There's Medicaid. We call that Medi-Cal here in California. There's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, formerly food stamps. Public housing, such as Section 8 vouchers. Supplemental Social Insurance, or SSI. The Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC, and many, 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 many more. We definitely like to have our eligibility criteria be means tested to make sure that the recipients are those most in need. So to sum up, basis of social allocations involves those who are the beneficiaries. There's a continuum of choices. Remember, choices, alternatives, dimensions of choice, from universal to selective. Attributed need involves group allocation and a normative standard of need. Compensation also involves group allocation, but now a normative criteria of equity. Diagnostic differentiation involves individual allocation and a professional judgment of need. And finally, means tested need is also individual allocation, but the government determines need. So here are the sources of the images, and I think that is it. The end is near, sort of, not really. There's 3 more to go, so make sure you pop over. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.